Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Keys, our monthly broadcast for our wonderful clients around the world. Each month, we take a topic of interest to organisations wherever they are and try to look at what we're knowing at the moment, what the latest research is saying, and how we can all do a better job at understanding what's going on. And today, what bigger topic is there perhaps than ESG, environment, social, governance, huge issue facing organisations, society, people around the world, even if they don't use the terms, and a huge topic for us all to be on top of. And to help us do that, I'm delighted to have a wonderful panel with us today. If I can quickly introduce them to you, we have our own ESG lead, Sue, who is with us live from Cornwall in the far southwest of England. You'll hear a bit more about where she is now because it's very relevant to the topic today in some ways. So Sue's going to kick us off. Then we're going to be with Ed, who is with me today in our London office, and he's been talking to chief sustainability officers around the world and is going to share their perspectives with us. But then we also want to ground ourselves in real people's lives, and Delphine, who is in our Paris headquarters today, is going to help us think about what a more accessible world can look like, building on some of the user experience research that we've been doing. And then we're going to be with Britt, who is in Chicago and who has been doing some research to help us unwrap the world of sustainability packaging. So trying to cover a whole range of topics. We're trying to make sure we've got your input as well. So do give us your questions in the chat box as we go through, and we'll try to answer them at the end. And any we can't cover, we'll follow up with you afterwards. We are going to share a certain number of slides and pieces of research and perspectives, which we hope are useful for you. They'll all be in your inbox tomorrow. So you certainly don't have to take copious notes. Be with us, and we look forward to hearing your comments. And Sue, we look forward to your reflections on this changing environment. You've been thinking about this because it's your job, and you're going to help us think about where we are and what to do. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much. Yes, great question, Simon, and it is certainly something to keep us all awake at night, the question of what to do about ESG. Is it the best of times or the worst of times? We know we do live in interesting times. So to quote Charles Dickens, yes, let's start with the worst of times. Let's think of the bad news first, what's not going well. We know that global temperatures hit 1.6 degrees above pre-industrial levels in 2024. And the Paris Agreement goal, if you remember, was to stay below 1.5 degrees by 2050. So we're actually almost at that point, although actually it needs a few more years just to see if we really are. In Davos this year, the UN Global Compact announced that only 17% of its sustainable development goals are on track to be achieved by 2030. Now, these were really supposed to be the blueprint for a more resilient and prosperous world and their roadmap out of the current global crisis. And as we're all aware, the first quarter of the year has seen countries and previously invested organizations pulling out of some of their sustainability commitments. And we'll hear Ed talk a little bit more about that later. So why the best of times? What's there to feel good about? Well, the energy transition is now well underway. The world now invests almost twice as much in clean energy as it does in fossil fuels. Oh, I don't know why that's moved on, sorry. There we are. There is a business imperative to progress as we see more and more having to build resilience to actually reduce the risks of climate change. So the fire damage, you'll remember those terrible fires in California, the damage cost will exceed $250 billion and many areas will become uninsurable. So they need to build resilience and reduce risk, which means ESG programs have to continue. And you'll hear from Ed in a few minutes that most companies are actually resetting and affirming some commitments to global climate targets and sustainable growth. And a couple of weeks ago at the Economist Sustainability Week conference, I actually heard John Kerry speak, and some of you might remember him as Secretary of State in Barack Obama's government. Now, he said we need to bring the electorate and consumers along with us. People need more than generalities. Most, and he was referring to Americans, actually want to respond to the climate crisis. So how do we bring the consumers and electorate along? People know we have a crisis on our hands. Citizens across the world agree strongly that we are headed for environmental disaster without rapid change to our habits. However, nearly 3/4 of those people say they're already doing all they can to save the environment. So you could interpret this as outrage and frustration at companies' inaction. But a more empathetic perspective would be to hear the lack of agency people really feel to impact progress. But when it comes to sustainability, consumers do not have all the same attitudes, nor do they behave in the same way. If we understand better the different approaches to sustainability, we may be able to speak to people in a way that will invite them to respond. As you'd expect, there are people out there who want to save the world. In 2024, activists represented almost 1/4 of people across the world. And at the other end of the scale, there is a 1 in 5 disengaged distancers who know that often for reasons of prioritization, lack of money, general disinterest in the topic, they are not the ones to save the world. But in the middle, representing well over half of the world's population, there are people who are movable if you speak to them in the right way. This is the group to focus on, mainstream consumers who want to make a difference but need a little more persuasion. Now, that was in 2024, but our recently released 2025 Essential study shows that while environmental concerns are rising, sustainable actions are waning as consumers grapple with doubts about the impact, barriers related to cost and availability, and actually just many more things that they are concerned about every day, and it's dropped to the bottom of their consideration. So our question is 2025 the year when consumer commitment starts to decline? You can see from the numbers here that the activists and willing contributors have decreased, each by 2 percentage points, which is actually significant, and the disengaged distances have increased. So what may be behind that? They tell us that making sustainable choices is often more expensive, which we know in some cases it certainly can be. But the second reason is that they don't know which products are sustainable. Companies and brands are not sharing the sustainability efforts that they're making with their consumers. So therefore, they don't know what is and what is not sustainable. Another piece of work we did with partner Public in Canada told us that in the US and Canada, half of consumers abandon products due to confusing sustainability messages. This same piece of work actually looked at claims to see which resonated well and which did not. And the top performing claims were those which involved a personal benefit or a benefit to animals, whereas the lower performing claims were those with a less direct connection to people and less easy to understand, with the lowest performing claims being environmental and science-based. So things like locally sourced from Canadian American farmers, or we never use antibiotics or synthetic hormones or toxic pesticides, they consistently perform well. Things like certified organic and carbon neutral were less personal and less likely to drive appeal and make a meaningful contribution to brand choice. Finally, we know that it is never sustainability alone that sells a product. People buy products because they're delicious, because they're convenient, because they're refreshing or desirable, meet my needs. And sustainability is what we call a co-benefit, but not just any co-benefit. It needs to be a co-benefit that fits with the values of your brand and congruent with the brand's DNA. It needs to fit with the core essence of the brand to be authentic and credible. So here's a great example from Corona. I'm just moving the slide on. Yeah, as this ad plays, so the ad is playing now, this is great. You can see that ABI have put sustainability actually at the heart of this proposition. They found the connection through nature. 100% natural ingredients is not just a reason to believe, it's at the heart of the brand's value proposition. And it worked. Corona grew by 15.5%. Leading ABI's 6.7% revenue increase in 2024. So just to finish, the 3 things to bring the consumers and citizens, sorry, let's just move that on. There we are. 3 things to bring the consumers and citizens on this sustainability journey with you. Firstly, know where they're coming from. What is their sustainability mindset? And talk to that. Don't assume that everybody will think and behave the same. And certainly don't just focus on the activists, because there are many more who are much easier to bring along with you and more important. There's more volume to be had from the other groups. Secondly, make your claims benefits relevant to the person rather than unrelatable claims about science or the environment. That might seem like the most obvious thing to do, to say what it is, but actually do the work to connect the benefit with the consumer need. And finally, make it easy for them to make the right choice. Who would not want to drink a sustainable Corona beer after seeing that piece of communication? Thank you very much, and back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Sue. And I know you're going to get a prize because you're speaking to us from a cafe. I don't know if it has sustainable beer, but we do appreciate that guided tour of the territory. And I want to just stay for a minute on the sustainability point, because something we often hear is, oh, well, consumers won't pay for sustainable products anymore. I think what I'm getting from you is that might be wide of the mark.
Well, yes, it's not 100% accurate. And it's interesting, I'm sitting here drinking, I paid £2.50 for this sustainable cup, which I will return before I leave and get my £2.50 back. So I did pay for it. But my question back to you, or back to the people listening as well, is why are we asking the consumer to bear the cost of this, when much of the investment actually is already being made by organizations to make their products more sustainable, because they have to. In order to be sustainable businesses, they have to move away from using plastic or towards moving more sustainable cocoa or coffee. So there is a lot more to be done to build those sustainability actions into a brand's value proposition, like we saw with Corona, and providing that's done authentically, it will actually raise the desirability of the brand and potentially command a premium. And as Simon said, I'm in Cornwall today because I'm at a conference called Anthropy, which is essentially, it's a UK-based initiative, but it's visioning a more positive, sustainable, equitable and successful future. And I attended at lunchtime a talk on brands, and that's exactly what people were, the marketing teams were saying there.
Lovely. I look forward to hearing more about that. Now, Sue is our wonderful Chief Sustainability Officer, as you can see, but other Chief Sustainability Officers are also in post, because my friend and colleague Ed has been speaking to 55 of them who collectively form the Ipsos ESG Council. And what I love about this is that it gives us a real insight into the world of people like Sue. Ed, tell us what you found.
Thanks, Simon, and delighted to join you today. Hello, everybody. So we formed the Ipsos ESG Council in 2023. It's a group of global sustainability leaders working to share ESG best practice and ideas to tackle the strategic issues and challenges that they face. Informed by, as you said, 55 in-depth interviews with council members, this year's report is titled Reset or Retreat. And in this summary of our report, dear viewers, I'll aim to give you the what, the so what, and the now what. So that's the lay of the land, what this means for ESG, and how you can use our insights to shape your ESG strategy. Now, there's a good chance that this is one of the reasons you've joined this webinar. You want to know, quite frankly, if ESG still matters. President Trump signed loads of anti-ESG and anti-DEI executive orders, pledged to drill, baby drill, pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and that was all on day one of his presidency. This anti-ESG sentiment was mirrored by a cultural shift in the boardrooms of many of the US's largest businesses, which cancelled DEI policies, dropped racial and gender equality targets, and stepped away from net zero commitments. But it's not just a US phenomenon. Almost half of ESG Council members feel that ESG is more of a political football than a priority for politicians. Council members from Europe, Brazil, Australia, and Canada all mention the hurdles they face due to political polarization, with DEI and net zero the recurring topics. In the world of political polarization, DEI is used as a wedge issue to separate people. You're either woke or anti-woke, while a lack of legislative support for net zero could put organizations persisting with climate reduction plans at a competitive disadvantage. Now, these political changes beg the question of what this means for ESG globally. In our report, with the help of our council members, we try to provide a balanced perspective and consider the broader context for ESG rather than focusing entirely on the events of a few months. So to start with, we'll have a positive. NGOs and sustainability leaders have long advocated for ESG's full integration into business strategy. And according to our council members, this has largely been achieved. 90% agree that ESG is fundamentally changing business practices. And almost all council members regularly collaborate with other departments to embed sustainability. But, and there's always a but, ESG implementation faces difficulties. Nearly 4 in 10 council members report that departmental objections can derail initiatives. Now, this won't be ideological opposition. These ESG strategies have, of course, been signed off by the board. So why are programs being derailed? Because of practical challenges such as resource constraints, global supply chain issues, or volatile economic conditions. Initial ESG strategies were often theoretical, not practical, and overlooked commercial realities, the impact of global events, and the burdens of reporting. Council members themselves say they spend more time on reporting than on delivering ESG priorities. And all of these factors have hindered effective implementation, and they prevent companies from translating ESG commitments into tangible action. And that is what leads to the perception that ESG is in trouble. Our council members feel that commitments are being watered down. Financial media felt that it was more terminal. So you can either view 2024 as the beginning of the end for ESG or a moment of necessary recalibration. Informed by our research, we believe that what we saw last year did not represent the death of ESG or a full-scale retreat from sustainable and responsible business practices, but rather a necessary reset for long-term viability and impact, a pragmatic response balancing ambitious goals with the realities of global operations and stakeholder expectations, adaptation in the face of challenging conditions. Clearly, our council members have a lot to deal with, but fortunately, they're a smart bunch, and we've collated some of their best practice and advice to help you sail more smoothly through these choppy waters. What can we learn? Well, the first piece of advice is that you just cannot pick and choose E, S, or G. By now, the elements of ESG are deeply interconnected, and viewing them as separate entities or focusing predominantly on only one pillar can be really counterproductive. The second learning is that strong governance is the real key to actual progress. As you can see the quote from one of our council members there, governance is the how, the others are the what. It may be the least sexy element of ESG, but without strong governance, you can't deliver properly on the other 2 pillars. Good governance ensures transparency, accountability, and alignment with organizational values, which makes environmental and social initiatives more effective. ESG strategies have the best chance to succeed when they follow best business practice, which helps with setting targets, establishing clear objectives, tracking progress, and course correcting as required. The third key learning, which links to Sue's point about the importance of consistency with brand DNA, is that to make the biggest difference with ESG, you need to focus on addressing the most relevant opportunities or risks your specific industry, market, and operations are facing. The best way to do this is by conducting a double materiality assessment. Essentially, it's about picking the right ESG battles and making sure your efforts are aligned with your company's core values. Now let's look at council members' solutions for overcoming polarisation. The first again links to double materiality, and Sue's point earlier is to ensure that your sustainability programs are authentic to who you are as a company. If you do this, you're much less likely to be called out for greenwashing or woke capitalism. The second point is that if politicians are becoming more fickle, you can focus on other stakeholders who have a greater interest in your sustainability efforts and who play a greater role in your overall company success. Employees, investors, and consumers are just as important as regulators and policymakers. And the third option is to try and keep your head down. It's not always possible, particularly for consumer-facing businesses, but more niche organizations can allow trade associations or NGOs to speak on their behalf, or simply try and wait it out until the political pendulum swings back the other way. Hopefully plenty of food for thought there. Before we finish, I'd just like to look at some reasons for positivity. First, although polarization is a rising concern in a number of markets, we've seen nothing so far to suggest a mass rollback of ESG outside the US. Council members feel that Europe remains bullish on sustainability, and speak of a growing appetite for ESG in Asia as well. Second, stakeholders really do care. Only 1 in 6 council members struggles to tell sustainability stories that resonate with stakeholders. This suggests that they still want to hear about what organisations are doing to meet ESG targets. And finally, only 1 in 4 council members told us that their company has significantly incorporated artificial intelligence into their ESG strategy so far. This suggests a potentially major opportunity for AI to reduce the reporting burden, if that is, busy sustainability teams can find the time to properly implement it. Back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Ed, for giving us an insight into the world of people who are grappling with these issues day in, day out. And I think I really like your title, Reset or Retreat. I think that sort of encapsulates it. But where do you net out on the long-term prospects for ESG? Do you have any firm views either way?
That's really the big question, isn't it? I mean, I think ESG, there's no doubt it does have a bit of a branding or even a reputational challenge at the moment. And it's not just among detractors. We held a roundtable with some UK-based ESG council members recently, and many of them don't actually love the term and only use it in certain contexts, like when speaking with investors. But look, I think the reality is ESG is far from perfect, but for all its flaws, it is the best framework we have at the moment. The structure it provides for reporting, while burdensome, as we saw earlier, it does help companies to attract investors, improve risk management, enhance long-term value creation. So until something else comes along, and something else may come along, but until then, sustainability professionals are going to have to hitch their wagon to the ESG train, address the challenges, continue to integrate responsible business practices, and most importantly, as Sue mentioned, bring the public along on the journey as well, because that's what's going to really accelerate impact.
Well, thank you. And that really actually connects us very well into what we're going to talk about now with Delphine, because Delphine's presentation very much is about the public. It's about their own experiences interacting with, let's say, services and different providers in different contexts, and lots of the things I know for us to think about here. Delphine, help us think about a more accessible world and what that might look like. Over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, nice to meet you. I will share today a piece of the world with you, a world with more accessibility. But to start this journey, let's review together what accessibility means and why it is so important to keep this strategic angle when doing product, services, and even more research. Because accessible user experience can have positive impact on a company's brand reputation, attracting people with disabilities, but also customers who value these principles. So, first of all, what accessibility means. Accessibility means allowing everyone to access everything. Accessibility is essential for 10% of the population, necessary for 40%, and comfortable for everyone. Sometimes things are done to make an object accessible. It doesn't impact the use that the others have of it, but considerably improves daily life. Look at some examples. You have the subtitles, elevators, remote control. And do you know that the text messages was created to communicate with deaf people? So now, looking at another example, we are going into the bank universe. You have 2 bank cards here. Imagine you are clients with a vision disability. The first card, you can simply identify the embossed characters and the notch to help differentiate with your other cards. It's simple, it's for everyone. The second example, it's another version, a printed character card. So no notch. And this choice does not bring anything more to users, but it excludes people with disabilities. So it's like, I love this quote because it's about adding blueberries into the muffin after cooking them. So it's really hard if you want to add the blueberries at the end of the cooking session. So it's the same with accessibility. If you want to achieve accessibility goals, the main recommendation we have is to onboard people with disabilities from the beginning of the process to ensure that your product or service will be more easily accessible and adopted more easily by everyone. It is also a way to reduce the costs of redesign to make your products or services accessible, because these costs are higher than the original development costs. So let's go with some data. To be honest, accessible user experience is critical for all of us. At present, 16% of the population lives with a disability, and that number is growing as global populations age. A recent study showed that 96% of the website's homepages are not accessible for people with disabilities. That means people who use assistive technology like screen reader to navigate a website often encounter issues when trying to use the internet. People with disability will choose based on their experiences. 71% of users with disabilities indicate they will leave a website if it's not accessible. And there are a strong referral community that will tell their friends and family when they have great experiences and also when they have bad ones. So in this context, governments want to make services more accessible to people with disability, and that's great. And today, over 40 countries have mandatory web accessibility standards. That means company risk, fines, and litigation when their websites and apps don't work well for a user of assistive technology. As an example, the European Accessibility Act comes into force this year. By June 28th of 2025, all companies doing business in Europe will need to comply with these regulations. And similar to GDPR, this rule applies even to companies not based in the European Union. So brands must ensure that digital products and services such as at their website, app, devices are accessible to people with disability. It's the case for public online services, but also businesses that provide online banking, financial services, e-commerce, online shopping, and travel ticketing services as examples. So let's go back with the last example in the banking universe. To meet the requirements of the Web Consortium accessibility guidelines, websites and apps must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust for people with disabilities so they can have the same access to online banking services as everyone else. So if you imagine having a disability and try to check your account balances, pay bills from your bank account online, or apply for a new account, to understand what financial services companies can do to create more accessible experiences, the first thing to do is you must test them with different profiles, like blind, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, mobility impaired, and also neurodivergent. This is what we made for 2 websites we tested, and we found 5 common issues that can also apply to other product categories, and we have ways to improve them. So I can give you 2 examples of the result we had from this project. The first one is that users struggle a lot to understand what products would be best for them because they had to click through multiple screens to find and compare different product offers. So our recommendation is really to prioritize the most important content and give them the best and the more important information at the beginning. It works for people with disabilities, but it will work also for all the other people. The second example is when you have poor color contrasts, it makes the content and features hard to see for many people. So try to give the user controls to let them manage adjustable aspects of the user interface, like color, contrast, but also font size is important. And sometimes even the best intention to make a website or app accessible don't match up to the needs of people with disabilities. In those cases, nothing helps like a real person, and making it easy to connect with live support will improve conversion rates and increase customer loyalty and referrals. Thank you for your attention. So just to end this presentation, here are 3 things to keep in mind to bring more accessibility into your strategy. Firstly, accessibility is for everyone. When we design for accessibility, we are not just designing for a small part of the population. We are designing for people with a wide range of abilities and disabilities. And we are making our product and services more usable for everyone. Secondly, early integration is key. The earlier we integrate accessibility into our research, product development, service development processes, the less costly it will be to fix accessibility issues later on. And finally, go beyond. Think about accessible documents, questionnaires to reinforce your engagement with customers, but also think internally. Look at your colleagues. Maybe they need more accessible tools too. Thank you. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you. Well, thank you. No, real food for thought there. And I never knew about the genesis of the text messaging. So thank you so much for just setting out this topic, both in terms of the good that come out of it, but also important the legislation that's in place, because I think what we're saying is, if I'm a Brazilian bank or an airline in India, I need to be following this if I'm operating in Europe. That's basically where people are heading, where we're heading, isn't it? And any ideas or thoughts or other tips you give to us, whether we're adapting things ahead of the European legislation or just more generally? What's your top takeaway for us?
Yeah, maybe I think one thing can be important to mention is that it exists many tools like accessibility overlays that claim to solve all your accessibility issues. In reality, most accessibility overlays interact badly with custom settings and assistive technology, and sometimes it makes the experience worse, not better. So it's important to test before adding these overlays, because it can be worse than the existing experience. And if you use automatic audit reviews, so it exists many tools like that, you need to check how many errors and mistakes they will identify, because it's always important also to check the accuracy of the tool. And sometimes, and most of the time, we need to compete with human vision. So real people doing interviews, testing the website, the app, or the interface, and completing the audit with these people is clearly a good thing to do.
Lovely, thank you for that. And actually, speaking as a real person and hearing your thing, is certainly I'm one of those people who's benefited from, let's say, the ability to improve accessibility and get that font that little bit larger on my phone. So, and we're coming back to my phone later, because questions, please do put them in the chat, and we will come back to them at the end. But we're going to stay with real people, real lives, what they experience day in, day out, because Britt, you've been doing a lot of research around packaging, the products we buy, how they can be more sustainability. So time for you to unwrap your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
Of course, thanks, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And as Simon mentioned, my name is Britt, and my specific area is package testing. So packaging is an area that gets a good amount of attention when it comes to sustainability, not only because there are implications in terms of the manufacturing, the using, the disposing of packages that products come in, but because it also serves to communicate your brand's purpose at the point of sale and in consumers' home. So as a result, it's a vehicle not only for your product, but also your brand. And if we want to get the right messages across about our products and our brands to consumers, it's imperative to understand how consumers think about sustainability. So for most folks, sustainability is not a part of their day jobs like it is for, I'm sure, many of us on this call. So we need to be realistic about their perceptions in this space, right? And that's exactly where Ipsos comes in, as our primary goal is to understand society, markets, and specifically people. So to this point, we asked the public all over the globe to choose which actions they could take to reduce their household emissions. And of all of the items on this list, there were about 60. People ranked recycling and consuming less packaging within the top 3. However, when we look at the actual impact of these items, those associated with packaging are actually near the bottom of the list. So the fact that these perceptions of what is most impactful doesn't align with reality can be attributed to what we call the believe true gap, meaning that even when people want to make the sustainable choice, they don't always know the best or most impactful way to do so. So to explore this gap even a bit further, we conducted research here in the US, which surveyed over 4,000 people about many product packages across 4 different product categories. And in doing so, we took away 3 primary findings. The first of which being there is no one single way to be sustainable. So when it comes to product or packaging innovation, we measure purpose, which is a more consumer-friendly term for sustainability, in 2 distinct ways. So first, we quantify the overall purpose associated with a specific product or package by asking consumers as if they feel that purchasing that product would contribute to a more sustainable environment or society. And then we go on to categorize what type of purpose they find to align with this product. Is it related to social equity, health and well-being, or environmental sustainability? So we looked across the 4 categories we explored. They were beer, salty snacks, body soap, and laundry detergent. And generally, people quantify sustainability similarly, meaning there's no one category we surveyed that's inherently perceived to be more or less sustainable than the others. However, where things get a bit more interesting is that when we look at how sustainability is categorized, beer and laundry are more likely to be seen as contributing to environmental sustainability, which makes sense given their contribution to water usage and runoff, whereas salty snacks and body soap are more likely to be described by their impact on an individual's health and well-being. All of this to say, as Sue mentioned earlier, depending on what category you work in, consumer expectations of sustainability will undoubtedly look different, right? And we're going to return to another topic we've touched on so far in this webinar, the idea that people's perceptions may not always reflect reality. And to do this, we're going to do a deep dive into some of our findings from the beer category. So interestingly, consumers rated beer in glass bottles as more sustainable than those in cans. So it was an interesting finding because, of course, while both are recyclable options for consuming beer, it's generally acknowledged that cans have a lower environmental footprint when we consider the entire product life cycle, right? Production, transportation, all of it. And in addition, this research was conducted in the US, but imported beers were perceived to be more sustainable than US domestic beers. Even though domestic beers are typically more environmentally friendly due to shorter transportation distances, the ability to locally source ingredients. So really, this just proves that for beer drinkers, there is quite a lot to be learned about what actually makes a sustainable product, right? Because what consumers are perceiving as most sustainable may not actually be so. So to this point, we've learned that while purpose is essential for doing good business, alone, it's not going to be enough to drive a real impact in market. And to illustrate this, we conducted a correlation analysis in each of our categories tested, in which we looked to see, whether perceptions of sustainability were predictive of consumers' willingness to buy a product. And what we found is, you guessed it, this depends on the category. So when it comes to laundry detergent, where consumers really value efficacy above all else, there was essentially no link between the products found to be most sustainable and those that people are most likely to purchase. On the other side of the spectrum, for beer and soap, we did find that sustainability ratings could predict which products would be most in demand. However, let's not forget, this is about perceived sustainability, right? So we're not necessarily saying that the most sustainable products are the most in demand. It is those perceived to be the most sustainable. So this is not to say that if you're sitting on this call and you work in the laundry industry, you don't need to worry about sustainability of your products. None of us would ever say that. However, what we believe is with sustainability, we should all take a broader view, because with purpose, we need to play the long game. So what that means is that while perceptions of purpose do not necessarily have a large immediate effect on people's willingness to buy a new product or adopt a new innovation, purpose has been shown to directly contribute to someone's brand equity when done well. And we know that positive brand equity, along with a relevant, distinct proposition, ultimately will lead to success in market. So to this point, as you and your teams work to optimize your sustainable innovation strategies, it's essential to think of sustainability not as the sole benefit of your innovation, as Sue mentioned earlier, but instead it should be a way to better address core consumer needs. So when your sustainability initiatives can unlock more convenient or cheaper or tastier or just generally better products, we can do our part to help nudge consumers to make the right choice. So with that, back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Britt. And I think that's a really good reminder about the perceptions and reality thing through the lens of the glass beer that may have been imported. And one of the things I took away from that, and Sue, you touched on it too, actually, was that sustainability claims may not always resonate. And interested, Britt, from your work, your advice on perhaps how, broadly speaking, we can make sure that we can connect our claims with what consumers really care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, Simon, it's going to depend where you sit, what that best claim is. But at the heart of it, it's really understanding why consumers are making the choices they make. What drives interest in a category? What do people care about when shopping for your products? So instead of just being green for the sake of being green, let's consider in the laundry category, for example, how we can highlight that our more sustainable detergent also means longer lasting freshness. For food, it might be something about identifying ways that this more sustainable option is also healthier for consumers. So all of you who work in specific categories probably know what these drivers are, but of course, research can help close the gap in cases where you're not so sure.
So you're finding a pretty dynamic, let's say, area to work in these days. Great. Well, thank you for that, Britt. We've got this whole grounding ourselves in the consumers' lives has definitely got some of you on the call thinking about what it means for your own organisations. And Delphine, I've got a question for you. It's from one of our clients on the call who said they may not have a big budget for consultants. So I'm asking you for some free advice today. Is there a single guide as to what accessibility means for good practice when it comes to web pages? Where can our client go just to get some really good reference points and advice?
To be honest, because it's a regulation, all businesses need to align with. You have accessible on the internet all the information you need to check the 106 criteria for the new regulation. So this is why some companies are looking for consultants and asking us to do the ergonomic audits about the accessibility. You have, as I said before, some solution that automatically identify many issues about accessibility. So you can have this automatic tool, and we partner with one of them in Ipsos to identify more than 50–60% of the issue you can have regarding accessibility. And if you have more money to spend on the research, it's great to have real users to test your website with us and to identify the other criteria and how to optimize them. The other thing is that if you have a website, you need to work with designers and developers, and those guys maybe know about the accessibility regulation and can maybe help you to identify all the things you have to change to be more accessible and get your certificate.
Good stuff. So time to challenge our web teams. And also, I know you're being very modest, Delphine, but I know you and colleagues have written a white paper recently looking at financial services, but I know there's reference points for all of us, so that we'll put that in the show notes. Ed, I'm going to because we've got a question about how you message, and particularly if you're an international organisation where you're perhaps thinking about your message and language in the US and the rest of the world? How do we even start addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, so this comes back again to the polarizing terms, right? So ESG or DEI, and they've become weaponized. And one of our council members from Canada said, "I don't talk about ESG because ESG is a trigger for people out there." And there has been research that suggests that other terms. Britt mentioned purpose as a more consumer-friendly term. Responsible business is another one that moderates view as a moderate agenda, conservatives view as a conservative position. So, it's sort of something that is a bit less triggering and divisive potentially as a term. But the way I see it in terms of how you talk about it, just rebadging it as responsible business or purpose isn't going to appease detractors. It's ESG and DEI, the terms have become lightning rods, I think, for criticism, but really it's the policies and the targets and the commitments that people actually disagree with. It's just what it's called isn't really going to change how people feel about the actual initiatives. I think that there is a big risk of dialing down communication in certain markets due to political risk. And that can erode stakeholder trust. It can erode employee advocacy. And we typically in Ipsos, particularly with our corporate reputation clients, the big reputational risk is a say-do gap. So, not walking the talk. So when your actions don't match your words, but maybe the next issue in the next few years will be relating to green hushing and people people being afraid to shout about doing the right thing. So I do think that there are risks to staying quiet. I understand, particularly in the US, why people might want to dial down communication. I think, at the least, what we're most likely to see would be less communication, but organizations still actually continuing to activate, just not talking about it so much.
Lovely. And so I can see you nodding there, Stu. What are your perspectives on that you're observing from talking with clients around the world?
Yes, I think what Ed was saying there, carrying on with the messaging that fits with your brand and what your company is doing, staying away from those more inflammatory terms. But to me, during Anthropy, we've been discussing this quite a lot. To hush or not to hush, certainly not to wash, but to hush or not to hush. And the general sense is, when you think about what Tim Cook did, he came out and said, "We will continue with our plans." And so there are some strong, courageous leaders out there who are saying, our values don't change with the change of government. We still need to continue to have a sustainable business. If we don't have good relationships with cocoa farmers, we won't have a business in the future. So we are continuing with these things that are important for our business. So the more you can connect what you're doing with your business purpose, with the goals and targets that you've set, the more likely those things are less likely those things are to be seen as sort of inflammatory or woke or doing for the sake of doing them. You have to do them because the business has to do them to survive. So I think that's where we get connection of the initiative with the strategy of the business is really, and that's another key thing.
Lovely. And actually, the point about the business, I think, touches all of your presentations, because on the one hand, even for Britt and Delphine, where you may be looking more out at the consumers, you have to look in at the company strategies, or Delphine, the actual legislation. I mean, Sue, a question that's come up for perhaps you could kick us off with is around, thinking about organisations internally. Just some thoughts on how we can get them, as I said, move them along and gain their buy-in to take the right steps. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've spoken a lot recently with sustainability officers to talk with them about how it would actually help them to have closer relationships with marketing. And if you consider every single company, will have some kind of sustainability goals. They will be looking to move forward in some direction. And sometimes the initiatives and activities that the sustainability teams are doing are not actually known by the marketing people. So if we've got people in this audience who are connected closely to the marketing people, they won't necessarily be aware of some of the things that are happening. So to me, if the business is committed to certain sustainability actions, know what those are, And then as you go about your work with consumers or your work with brands, then start to be more curious about what it is the business is actually doing, and think about how you can bring some of those things into consumer benefits or benefits to the brand value itself. And then actually, because you know that that's what the business is moving towards. So again, it fits with the business strategy. I think that's probably the best way to then communicate internally. You're not trying to sort of push it for some kind of reason, or we should do this because it's the right thing to do. No, it's the right thing to do because that's the direction the business is moving in, and that's what we all want to be achieving together. But those two activities, sustainability and marketing, are often in separate silos, disconnected from each other in businesses. Yeah,
and that comes through, Ed, I think, in some of the ESG Council, because I know you ask a number of questions, which is really about how you can, let's say, energize change internally to have that positive impact. Any things you haven't been able to touch on yet on the kind of internal challenges and opportunities that they were talking about?
Yeah, really putting me on the spot there, Simon. But yeah, I think that so Ipsos, Karen and Box, our employee engagement team, and they carried out some research a couple of years ago, and they found that employees really do engage with sustainability and ESG initiatives. So I think that what we talked about with stakeholder balancing in my presentation about, particularly in a polarized world, if politicians don't want to hear about what you're doing from an ESG perspective, there are still plenty of stakeholders to do, and your employees are absolutely crucial to that. They are your number one advocates, or they should be, and if you can get them energized and on board with what you're doing, then that helps from your just general reputation, but particularly as an employer brand, and can really help make sure that the future pipeline for talent is positive.
That's good. That's a good point. That's great to actually bring that employee perspective in, and beyond just talking to the web team, which I know Delphine has flagged as one of the groups. Delphine, I'm going to come to you just for some final words for you from the perspective actually of other consumers, the customers, the people. Any final words of advice for us based on what you've heard and you've seen working with real people in their real lives?
I think those people really like to be involved in the discussion, and as I say, in early stage of the project, it's not just asking questions, giving the feedbacks. It's really more a collaborative way to work to ensure we imply them in the full process. You should look like that, like an opportunity to increase understanding of your offers on your website, and they will help you to, I would say, bring the best of what you can do. And being more accessible is not only for a small amount of people, as I said, it's for everyone. So include them as soon as possible and as you can. It's better.
That's a great call to action. And Britt, for those of us thinking about the communicating via the packaging or the tangible products that we see and consume, what perspectives or further advice would you give us, having immersed yourself in their day-to-day experiences?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I give relates back to a comment Sue made about asking consumers to pay more for sustainability, because on most of the research I do, clients want to tell consumers about the great things they're doing, and they're hoping that as a result, consumers will shell out some bigger bucks to help with those profit margins. And I'd encourage companies to think about this differently, because when there is some additional benefit, people will pay more for products that meet needs. However, when we think about the overall meaning of sustainability, when it comes to businesses, it's about being in business and doing good business for a long time to come, right? So it's on everybody's best interest that we all are more sustainable, and companies really do need to meet consumers, not even halfway, I'd say 80% of the way there, in order to make sure that we're all acting in each other's best interests.
Thank you for that one. And I think I'm going to proudly summarize in 3 statements all of the presentations in one, because I think what I'm getting from the questions is be bold, be precise, but also be there for the longer term, because some of these changes and differences won't happen overnight, and you're going to have to work at it over time. So thank you to our wonderful panel for bringing together all of your perspectives. As I mentioned, they'll be shared with you tomorrow via emails, so you can download them and use them as you'd like. Thank you for all the questions. We'll follow any we couldn't answer up a little bit later. Thank you everybody on the call for being with us, and we look forward to being with you on the 15th of May. We're staying with the big topics because it's the Ipsos Generations Report, where we're going to be reflecting on some of the demographic realities that none of us, whether our organisation is large or small, or whichever country it's in, can ignore. So we're on the Generations Report in 6 weeks' time. But for now, thank you for being with us as we think about where next on ESG, and we look forward to keeping the conversation going. All the very best.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.